Superman and Lois, Season 3, Episode 2. Well, I felt this episode was a mixed bag. I liked some parts of it, and some parts of it not so much. We start out in this episode. It's obvious that Lois has gotten some bad news from the doctor, and she's not telling anybody about it. She and Clark get the opportunity to interview the judge who let Atom Man out of prison. They go to confront her, and while they are doing so, these three men show up, and they start to strong-arm the judge, manhandle Clark and Lois, and escort them out of the building. Clark follows the men. We see him up above the city, trying to listen to find out exactly where they have gone. Lois has stayed behind, waiting for the judge to come out of the building. Instead of coming out of the building, the judge goes up to the roof. She is making moves like she's going to jump. So Lois goes in and she tries to talk her down. Meanwhile, Mannheim is talking to his hired goon, who is saying that they have nothing to worry about because Lois Lane didn't get anything, except then Mannheim sees that Superman is hovering up in the sky above his building. So he goes out on his, balcony, patio, I don't know, his penthouse veranda. He shouts for Superman, and Superman comes. They have a discussion where Superman wants to know, basically, what this guy's up to. Well, he's trying to get this guy to admit that he was behind Atom Man getting powers and what had happened with their fight in the previous episode. And of course, Mannheim isn't going to admit to any of that, and then starts tossing accusations about Superman not making a difference to his community at Superman, and that he hasn't actually made the world better, yada yada yada. It basically ends with him telling Superman to leave his home and never come back. Lana, she was at home. She received a phone call from George, the outgoing mayor. He was trying to tell her something. Unfortunately, the weird hooded figure shows up with the ear face. We'll just call it ear face because it looks like an orifice. Anyway, so that thing shows up and uses its sound weapon to attack George while he was on the phone with Lana, so she heard the whole thing. So George was killed by this creature / person, whatever it is, saw that George was on the phone with Lana, so obviously that's very dangerous for Lana. Meanwhile, the kids have all gone off to this party in Metropolis. It was Sarah and Natalie went together, and unbeknownst to them, Jordan and Jonathan went themselves, and none of them knew that the other group was going to be there. Natalie had actually told John Henry exactly where she was going. Kudos to Natalie. I really liked that they were developing her character more to make her a very mature, responsible, young woman. Because she's not a girl, she's not a grown adult, so I'll just call her a young woman. Sarah lied to her mother and told her she was going to be over at Natalie's just watching movies. So when Lana went over to John Henry's looking for Sarah after the previous mayor had been murdered, Sarah was not there. Lana was not happy about that for obvious reasons. John Henry was nice enough to invite Lana in. They shared dinner together. Lana told him about the phone call that she had received from George and what he had said, and they figured out that he had given a clue to the seal that is in the mayor's office. John Henry and Lana went over there, and they were inspecting the seal that was hanging on the wall. They found a USB stick that was lodged behind it. They'd plugged it into Lana's computer, and that's when Earface showed up, took the USB stick, destroyed the computer, fortunately left Lana and John Henry alive. Lois is trying to talk the judge down off the ledge. She is trying to tell the judge that she understands what it's like to feel like there's something that she absolutely can't control, that there's nothing that she can do, and feeling hopeless. She tells the judge that she has inflammatory breast cancer. And of course, Superman is there to hear this, so that was a terrible way for her to tell Clark, but of course he's okay with that. Unfortunately for John Henry, the earface thing reported back to Mannheim and told him about John Henry being alive. And he was very perplexed because Earface had apparently already killed John Henry. And Earface said, I know. I don't know what they're going to make of this John Henry being alive now, but we, the audience, know that this John Henry is from a different universe. This was not the same John Henry that's already dead, but I think that puts this John Henry in danger because they'd already killed his counterpart from this particular universe. The episode ends with Lois telling her sons that she has breast cancer. Yeah, there were a few other things that happened in this episode, like Kyle and Chrissy talking. Who knows where that's going to go, if they're going to get to know each other better and form a relationship. Probably, because in this episode it really seemed like it was heading more in the CW soap opera direction than it was in the Superman and Lois solving mysteries and fighting bad guys kind of direction. Which, obviously human beings have personal lives, things go on. So it would be one thing if it was just writing about Lois's illness, but then they're including all of these other people trying to couple up. And for some of them, it just seems like it's way too soon. And some of it is just unnecessary, like Jonathan's ex-girlfriend wanting to get back together. That seemed really out of place. Natalie, I can understand if she was curious about what happened to the guy that she had a crush on back in her original universe. That made sense to me that they would go and try to find that out. But it just seemed a little bit too convenient that they would all end up at the same party. Personally, I prefer this show being in Smallville because I like seeing Smallville. I don't want another city-based show, and this episode was almost exclusively in Metropolis. Very little of it actually took place in Smallville. The John Henry and Lana part obviously was in Smallville, but for the most part, the other characters, their story in this episode took place in Metropolis.
I didn't like this episode. I was worried this season that they were going to, with all these other shows, Supergirl, Arrow, all these CW shows shutting down, that I was worried that this series, which mostly went under the radar because they had their own stuff on the CW, I was worried they were going to have the opportunity in this show to introduce this stuff. This show almost feels like a completely different show. They're not based in Smallville anymore. It's coincidental that there's this mold issue in the high school. Maybe that's going to pan out to be something. It's awfully convenient. Now they can go to Metropolis for these parties. If this is a reoccurring theme where they just keep going to Metropolis, which they're probably going to because Mannheim is based in Metropolis, I don't understand what they're doing. In this episode, much like last week, the kids and the adults are in chaotic, differing stories. And I don't mean like they don't have their own narrative. This feels to me like the first episode of the first season when they were still in Metropolis and the kids were doing their own things, the parents were doing their own things, and there wasn't a lot of overlap, not a lot of family stuff. And then if you watched our primer, we talked about how when Martha died, she urged Clark to move back home once he figured out what she was saying. Then the show was based around Smallville. It was a small town story. It just seems like almost every scene in this episode was about hooking people up. You had John Henry and Lana. They might be a thing coming up here. Who knows? Kyle and Chrissy. Who knows? That high school party, you had Natalie meeting up with her.
She discovered that the guy she had a crush on in her old universe was a major dumbass in this one. And so it was some guy named Mateo that she met at the party who she seemed to hit it off with.
It just seemed like this was a CW show. The majority of the stuff in here was about hooking people up, by coupling them up.
Mm-hmm.
Molly gave more importance to the Mannheim story because we find that to be the more interesting, well, the only interesting thing other than Lois having some sort of cancer coming out of this episode. But they spent the majority of the time going through this kiddie stuff, CW stuff. I'm starting to actively dislike Sarah. who I actually used to like in the first 2 seasons. So they're making her unlikable. Jordan, at the end of this episode, or toward the end, he pulled a prank on this annoying guy who was running the party. And he froze his car, I'm guessing with his freeze breath. I don't know. They keep letting Jordan fly around and do these things. I understand in narrative, apparently he's never going to get caught. But like a rich household like that, I'm sure has security cameras. Mm-hmm. So they would have seen something like that. I don't know what happened to this show. I did not enjoy this episode at all. The little pieces here or there. There was this line that the judge gave, which I won't give the exact line, but I'm going to give a charitable interpretation because Mannheim talked about this as well, that maybe what she was talking about was growing up in some of the poor areas of Metropolis. A lot of people there don't have a chance. Because then Mannheim, when he was confronting Superman, he mentioned how Superman doesn't make a difference, a real permanent difference in the world. He fights fires, I think is what Mannheim said. Mannheim said something like, well, what do you do to make a difference? And he says, I save lives. And Mannheim said that that's essentially just putting out fires. I think Mannheim retorted back something too, like, you don't save lives around here or something like that. Mm-hmm. So if this goes down a class route, I might get on board with where this is going, but I'm giving it a very generous interpretation. There is another way to interpret this, which fits in very well with the other CW shows.
I do hope it goes down a class route because they still haven't resolved the class issues that were exposed in season 1, episode 1, as far as the dying small town of Smallville.
I think that's all better now. They seem
How?
That's a good question. Because I'm giving a charitable interpretation of both what Mannheim and what that judge said, because one could interpret it a different way that has nothing to do with class whatsoever.
And in this episode, Clark mentioned to Lois that his half-brother Tal had villas in other cities, in other countries that they could go visit. Again, this goes back to what I said in the previous video, that I liked them being a small town family. This running off to other countries to just have some nookie in some villa in some other country, I am not getting on board with this. I don't like this at all.
They are setting them up to have some sort of, here come the air quotes, privilege.
Oh, yeah, they are definitely showing a more privileged life in this season, and I don't like it. I don't need to see these teenage parties for super rich kids.
That's what I'm saying, what that judge said and what Mannheim said. If you factor in, they're going out of their way to include privilege with Clark and Lois now, these reporters that used to live in a small town and were just getting by financially. It really makes me worry that this is not going to go down an intelligent, let's point out the struggles that different classes are dealing with in this country. I think it's going to go down some sort of modern day social war that's going on in a lot of those CW shows.
Identity politics. Just call it what it is. Because I could relate to kids going out to a quarry and having a party there. I could relate to kids going out and having a party in a cornfield. I grew up in a town smaller than Smallville. I cannot relate to these kids having this party in some rich jerk's mansion. If they never went back to Metropolis again, I would be thrilled because I cannot relate to that.
They've got that moldy school.
I can relate to that.
Well, right, but that's why they're not in classes right now, I'm assuming. So are they just going to keep showing up at Metropolis? See, that's my worry. That goes against what made this show so good. We stated that in that primer. We liked the fact that they pulled it to Smallville and it was about
small town American values.
And my hope is that, and I'm not happy that the Lois character has cancer, but at the end there, the family was kind of bonding around that news. Maybe that's going to be the wake-up call so the family starts working together again instead of going their separate ways. What I'm hoping they do not do is if this goes down an injustice route where Lois dies and Superman loses his marbles, I'm done with this show. Not only will I be done with it, I will actively make videos hating on what they did this season because every other show is doing crap like that. Every other show is injecting identity politics. Why did they have to do that in this show?
Well, they keep showing these rich kid parties. I'm going to be done with this show way before it gets to a point where they reach any kind of injustice Superman.
They weren't even attending the party and saying, wow, I feel uncomfortable here. These aren't the kind of parties I'm used to attending.
Yeah.
Especially Sarah. Maybe Jordan and Jonathan, when they were in Metropolis, were used to going to parties like that. Mm-hmm. No way Sarah should have been used to doing stuff like that.
Oh, yeah, she was acting all outgoing. I mean, unless they decide in a future episode that, she's got some sort of mania problem or something where she's acting like she has all this super confidence, but it's not healthy.
Yeah, I think you're giving too much credit. I think they're slowly turning this into a CW show. You've got to have the metropolitan environment because it's not cool to be attending parties in a quarry. That's not cool. You got to be at a rich kid's house so that the kids will watch that stuff.
Well, isn't that how that new Gotham Knights started out last week? Which I could only tolerate maybe the first 10 minutes and then I had to turn it off.
I didn't stay around long enough to know.
Rich kids at a party?
CW. That's one of the reasons why Supergirl and I didn't last very long. That fashion magazine she worked at, I had no way of identifying with. To be fair, that show wasn't aimed at me. The first couple of episodes of Supergirl, it was about her trying to find her place, especially in the shadow of her cousin. And I thought that was a universal message. But as soon as that office stuff started going up, nope. Then they started having all these coupling relationship stuff. Like, I'm done. Like, this show doesn't work for me. It's not for me. Fine. I thought this show was for me, but they're turning it into a show like that now. If every scene or every other scene, actually it's like every 2 out of 3 scenes in this episode tonight was coupling up or talking about something like that.
And in Metropolis.
And it was annoying me. I am offering a warning to those who are listening. I still recommend seasons 1 and 2, but if you do jump on board because of what we said, stop at the end of season 2. Let's see how season 3 pans out before you go into season 3, because I've got some major warning bells going off right now after watching this episode.
We'll see where the next episode goes. I'm hoping that it returns to Smallville, but since Mannheim is set up in Metropolis, I have a feeling we're going to be spending an awful lot of time there. So overall, I found this episode to be a mixed bag. I am very concerned about the direction that the show is going this season, but time will tell. Anybody else watch it? If you did, definitely leave your comments below and we can talk about this.
Take care.